The darkness of love. In a quiet suburb, two women, May and Lan, have deeply loved each other for 3 years. They live together in a small house, with a garden filled with white roses that Lan takes care of. Their love was the envy of other couples in the neighborhood, with passion, romance, and an unbreakable bond. But everything started to change when Nhi appeared. Nhi was a new colleague at Lan's company, with a strange allure, sharp eyes, and a mysterious smile. Lan quickly became close to Nhi more than necessary, causing Mai to feel the changes. Jealousy silently grew in Mai's heart. Every time Lan came home late with work-related excuses, Mai couldn't help but think about the mysterious connection between Lan and Nhi. Lan's blatant lies and Nhi's evasiveness led Mai down a spiral of hatred. One cold and rainy night, when Lan claimed she had to work late, Mai decided to secretly follow her. Quietly leaving the house, she followed Lan to an old apartment in the city. Mai's heart ached as she saw Lan and Nhi standing in a small room, exchanging passionate looks. Mai's emotions turned from jealousy to deep betrayal. But Mai wasn't the only one silently watching in the darkness that night. In a corner, Nhi also saw Mai. Nhi had long been scheming more than Mai and Lan realized. Nhi not only wanted to take Lan away, but also wanted to destroy their relationship from within. Those sharp eyes were not only signs of seduction but also filled with malicious intent. Nhi understood the jealousy in Mai's heart and knew exactly how to trap her. Back home, Mai confronted Lan in a fit of rage. Harsh words, threats, and tears filled the room. Lan denied everything, saying Nhi was just a friend, but Mai no longer trusted her. Mai's heart was overshadowed by pain and hatred. Mai's anger turned violent, and in a moment of unchecked rage, she pushed Lan to the floor. When Mai tried to wake up Lan, she realized she had done something irreversible. Lan no longer breathed. Mai sat down, trembling. The extreme pain and regret flooded her, but it was too late. In the midst of confusion, Mai only blamed Nhi. She was the source of it all. A few days later, Nhi received a call from Mai. Mai's voice was cold, requesting a meeting. Nhi agreed, but had no idea that Mai had completely lost her mind. When Nhi entered the house where Mai and Lan used to live together, everything was silent. Only darkness enveloped. The white rose petals now withered and fell on the floor. The atmosphere in the house was heavy, eerie. Mai emerged from the darkness, holding a sharp knife in her hand. The pain and hatred reflected in her eyes. Nhi tried to convince Mai that it was all a misunderstanding, that she never intended to destroy their love. But Mai didn't listen. Her heart was completely broken. In the last horrific moment, the room only echoed Nhi's screams, then followed by a chilling silence. After Nhi's death, the house sank into a terrifying silence. Mai stood there, her cold eyes staring at Nhi's lifeless body lying motionless at her feet. Everything seemed to have ended, but the darkness of regret and obsession still lingered in her mind, slowly crushing her shattered soul. Mai calmly cleaned up the scene chillingly. She wrapped Nhi's body in an old bedsheet, dragging her body to the garden full of white roses, where Lan used to nurture them. She dug a large hole, burying Nhi under the rose bush, where their love once bloomed, now turned into the burial ground of hatred. When everything was done, Mai returned to the house, sitting quietly in the living room. But she couldn't sleep. That night, and the following nights, whispers from the garden flowers began echoing in her ears. It's not over yet. Strange phenomena began to occur. Every night, the sound of gentle footsteps echoed in the house, as if someone was quietly walking around. At first, Mai thought it was just her nervous system being stressed. But then the gentle breathing, the eerie giggles made it impossible for her to deny the presence of an entity in the house. Every time she looked out into the garden, the white rose petals seemed to turn into deep red, like the color of dried blood. One night, while sitting in front of the mirror in her bedroom, Mai suddenly saw a figure passing by in the mirror. She turned around, but there was no one there. But when she looked back into the mirror, Lan was standing behind her, with deep and soulless eyes. I promised to love you forever. But you killed me. My horrified jumped up from her chair. But when she turned back, there was no one. Cold sweat ran down her spine. Lan was dead. This couldn't be happening. But the figure kept appearing in the mirror, getting closer each time, carrying more resentment. The feeling of guilt slowly destroyed Mai from within. During the day, she tried to act normal, but at night, the house turned into a living hell. Everything around her seemed to be breaking. Objects in the house moved on their own, lights flickered. There was a time when she woke up in the middle of the night and saw a long trail of blood leading from the bedroom door to the garden. It seemed like someone had crawled in from outside, leaving behind a deep trail of blood. But when she followed the trail outside, it disappeared, leaving no trace. The height of horror occurred on a full moon night, when Mai couldn't take it anymore. She took the knife she used to kill Nee and stepped into the garden. Lan was standing there, right under the rose bush, with a devilish smile on her lips, eyes full of resentment. "You will never escape from me," Lan whispered. "You promised to love me forever. And now we will be together forever." In a panic, Mai rushed to stab the figure of Lan, but the knife only passed through the air. She fell to the ground, her hands clutching the rose that had turned as red as blood. The pain surged, and suddenly a cold hand touched her shoulder. She turned around and saw Lan, clearer than ever before. "It's time, my love." Mai's horrifying scream echoed throughout the garden, but no one heard it. The moonlight faded, darkness enveloped Mai's body, swallowing up any remaining traces of life. The next morning, when the neighbors discovered, the house was completely empty. There was no sign of Mai, Nee, or Lan. Only the deep red roses like blood, blooming all over the garden. It is said that whoever enters that house will hear whispers, footsteps, and laughter of the two women, forever trapped in the whirlpool of love, hatred, and death with no way out. In the end, darkness still lurked in the house, where deep love and unforgivable sin once resided. Since Mai disappeared, the house had become a dark legend in the neighborhood. People stayed away. No one dared to step foot in the garden where the deep red roses bloomed, silently bearing witness to the terrible tragedy. But the story of the house did not end there. 3 years later, a new couple, Thursday and Ha, moved into the neighborhood. They were unaware of the dark past of the house, only mesmerized by the strange beauty of the rose garden. Thursday, an art lover, was drawn to the mysterious red roses and the abandoned yet charming house. Ha, her girlfriend, felt something was amiss, but her love for Thursday made her push aside her concerns. In the beginning, everything seemed normal. They started renovating the house, creating a new space, trying to erase the past. However, the rose garden became an undeniable focal point in their lives. Thursday tended to the garden every day, and each time she touched the petals, a creeping sensation slowly grew within her. Then strange occurrences began to happen. The first night was at midnight. Thursday woke up abruptly, hearing faint whispers as if from a distance. She walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and stood before the garden through the window. Under the dim moonlight, Thursday saw the silhouette of a woman standing amidst the rose garden, her long hair covering her face. "Lan?" A whisper echoed in the wind. Thursday furrowed her brows, certain she heard something, but when she opened the door to go outside, the figure vanished like an illusion. That night, Thursday decided not to tell Ha anything, attributing it to fatigue. But that was just the beginning. In the following nights, footsteps could be heard inside the house, growing louder. Initially gentle, they turned into heavy knocks on the door at midnight. Each time Thursday opened the door, there was nothing but cold wind and darkness. Strange marks began to appear on the floor, wet footprints, as if someone had walked from the garden inside, leaving trails straight to the bedroom. Ha began to feel the change in Thursday. She became distant, often sitting for hours by the window looking out at the rose garden, sometimes whispering something to herself. Ha tried to comfort her, But Thursday's eyes became more and more distant, as if she were slipping away from reality. One night, Ha woke up shivering in the cold and found Thursday standing in the middle of the flower garden. She ran outside in a panic, pulling Thursday back inside. But Thursday just looked at her with empty eyes, whispering, "Lan will come back." "Who is Lan?" "Thursday, what are you saying?" Ha asked in fear, but Thursday didn't reply, just quietly returned to bed as if nothing had happened. The horrifying truth slowly revealed itself as Ha began to learn about the history of the house. She discovered chilling stories about May, Lan, and Ni. Their mysterious disappearances were never explained, but people believed they died in the curse of love. The ghosts of May and Lan seemed to never leave this house, and now Thursday was haunted by their very spirits. Ha decided they needed to leave the house immediately. She made plans but didn't tell Thursday, afraid of her strange reaction. However, on the fateful night when Ha was about to leave, a terrible event occurred. On the last night in the house, Thursday woke up again and walked into the garden once more. Ha chased after her, this time with a knife in hand for protection. As she approached Thursday, a sinister laugh echoed from all sides, as if every corner of the garden was reverberating. "We will be together forever." Ha saw the faint figures of May and Lan appearing among the bright red roses. In a panic, Ha ran to pull Thursday out of the garden, but Thursday turned back, her eyes wild. "I belong to Lan. We will stay here forever." In a moment of madness, Thursday grabbed the knife from Ha's hand and lunged towards her. A horrifying scream echoed throughout the garden as blood soaked the rose petals, redder than ever before. The next morning, the house was found completely silent. The couple had disappeared, leaving behind only the trace of the bright red roses, more vibrant than ever. The people in the neighborhood began to believe that this house was cursed, and anyone who lived there would be drawn into a whirlwind of love, hatred, and death. The curse of Lan and May still exists, haunting anyone who dares to step into the house, where restless souls forever linger, dragging people into the tragic ending of a hopeless love. The Whisper in the Night. As time passed, the story of the house with the crimson roses gradually became a spooky rumor in the neighborhood. No one dared to approach the house, except for the curious or amateur detectives trying to decipher the mystery of the cursed house. But what awaited them was only obsession and unexplainable horror. A year after the deaths of Thursday and Ha, a young woman named Lynn arrived in town. Lynn was a famous writer specializing in horror novels, always fascinated by supernatural stories. She heard about the house from the locals and immediately felt a strange attraction. Lynn decided to rent the house to find inspiration for her next book, despite the warnings from the landlord about the curse and haunted spirits inside. As Lynn stepped into the house, a strangely quiet atmosphere surrounded her. The rose garden outside still bloomed brightly, the red roses like blood, challenging anyone who dared to enter. Lynn sensed something unusual, but brushed it off, believing it was just from the scary stories she had heard. Initially, everything in the house seemed normal. Lynn began to write, but the longer she stayed, the more strange dreams appeared. In the dreams, she saw herself walking in a deserted garden, where red roses reached out like waving arms. And in the garden, she saw two women, one with eyes full of hatred, and the other crying out in pain. Lynn woke up each time with a cold sweat, her heart racing. The recurring dreams seemed to be trying to convey a message. One night, as Lynn was writing, she suddenly heard soft whispers from behind. She turned around but saw nothing. The whispers grew louder, as if someone was whispering in her ear. She stood up, following the sound, and discovered the garden gate of roses was open. Lynn's heart pounded as she stepped outside. The night covered the garden, but the moonlight shone down, making the red roses look even more ominous. As Lynn approached the tree trunk, she saw something horrifying. A pair of hands reaching out from the ground, as if someone was trying to crawl out. Lynn screamed and backed away, but the shadow of a woman appeared right behind her. Lan appeared clearly with a pale face, eyes burning with resentment. Lan didn't say anything, just looked at Lynn, then pointed to the ground, where the red roses were blooming from the grave. "She killed me, and you will be next." Lynn ran inside in a panic, but from then on, the nightmare truly began. The whispers grew more intense, the demonic laughter echoed through the house every night. The shadows of May and Lan constantly appeared in the mirror, sometimes even touching Lynn when she wasn't paying attention. Lynn realized she could no longer distinguish between reality and dreams. Everything became blurred in her eyes. Wet footprints began to appear on the floor, leading from the front door to the garden. Every night, Lynn saw the garden gate open automatically, as if someone wanted to pull her back there. But this time Lynn couldn't run away. She felt pulled by an invisible force, leading her closer to a terrible truth. One night, unable to take it anymore, Lynn decided to end it all. She dug up the garden where she believed something was buried. She found Nee's body buried deep underground, and as she touched the skeletal remains, Lynn felt the anger and resentment in the air. They never wanted to leave each other. Nee's last whisper echoed in Lynn's head, and then darkness enveloped her. She felt a cold hand grip her neck, pulling her down into the ground, where the roses were slowly enveloping her. The next morning, the locals found the empty house again. There was no trace of Lynn. Only one thing had changed. The deep red roses were now blooming more brightly than ever, as if they had been nourished by new souls. The curse of love continues. Anyone who sets foot in that house is pulled into a spiral of hatred and death, forever unable to escape. The restless souls of May, Lan, and Nee will continue to hunt down anyone who dares to challenge their dark past. The Awakening of Spirits. After Lynn's mysterious disappearance, the house became a center of horror in the area. Rumors of a haunting curse spread everywhere, but human curiosity is always what drives them to ignore the danger. The curious people kept showing up, trying to uncover the dark secrets of the house. However, no one escaped unscathed. One dark night, a group of young men Hung, Min and Tao decided to explore the haunted house for material for a YouTube channel about supernatural phenomena. They heard about the trapped souls in the house and felt drawn in by the horrific stories of glowing red roses. Armed with cameras and recording equipment, the group entered the house eagerly, believing they could break the curse or at least capture some terrifying footage. As soon as they entered, a chill instantly enveloped them. The air was heavy and thick, as if being squeezed tight. The walls of the house seemed to whisper something they couldn't make out. Tao laughed lightly to lighten the mood, but inside, a sense of unease began to form. Min, the leader of the group, decided to check the upper floor, where locals claimed they had heard the footsteps and seen the figures of May and Lan. As Min climbed the stairs, the camera's light flickered strangely. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed, as if someone was running down the stairs. Min turned around but saw nothing but thick darkness. It must be the wind, Min reassured himself, but his eyes were full of worry. Meanwhile, Hung and Tao were exploring the rose garden. The glowing red roses bloomed vividly under the moonlight. Hung, holding the camera, approached closer, but when he touched a petal, he jerked his hand back. A chilling sensation spread throughout his body from the petal, making him feel like he had touched something otherworldly. "Do you feel something off?" Tao asked, her voice full of concern. Hung nodded, trying to remain calm, although his bad intuition was becoming clearer and clearer. Suddenly, a mocking laughter echoed from deep within the house. At first, it was a light laughter, but it grew louder, resonating in every corner, as if the house itself was mocking the foolish ones who dared to step into its domain. Min ran downstairs in panic, his face pale. "Something is not right. We need to get out of here now," Min shouted. But as the group tried to leave, the main door slammed shut with a horrifying force, as if an invisible hand was intentionally holding them back. Hung ran to pull the door, but it wouldn't budge. Cold sweat began to trickle down each person's forehead. "We are trapped," Hung whispered, his eyes filled with fear. Tao was the first to feel something strange from behind. She turned around and saw a blurry figure standing right in front of the garden door. The woman's eyes stared blankly at her, soulless and eerie. Tao stepped back in shock, unable to utter a word. "Lan," Tao whispered, recognizing the figure in front of her. But it wasn't Lan as rumored. It was her ghostly apparition, with a face full of resentment and eyes filled with darkness. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from all directions. Each step, each tap reverberated in the confined space, as if the entire house was moving. Min and Hung ran upstairs to find an escape route, but when they arrived, they were surrounded by a cold draft. Doors opened and closed in front of them. Min shouted, but his voice only echoed into emptiness. Suddenly, Min felt a cold hand grip his ankle and pull him to the floor. Hung tried to pull Min up, but he felt as if an invisible force was holding him back. Both were slowly being dragged into the dark corner of the room by invisible hands. Tao stood there facing Lan. But from behind Lan, Mai appeared, with a face full of anger. Tao could sense the deep pain and hatred emanating from them. In that moment, she understood that these two would never rest, bound to the house, cursed by a love soaked in blood. Lan and Mai approached closer, as if wanting to pull Tao into the vortex of hatred and death. Red rose petals began to fall around, the petals clinging tightly to Tao's flesh, like sharp claws scratching and tearing her soul. Tao screamed, but her scream was drowned out by the cries from deep within the house, where Hung and Min were struggling with the awakened spirits. The house seemed to become a living nightmare. Darkness enveloped everywhere. The spirits of Mai and Lan laughed loudly, bringing along obsession and pain from the past. They did not want anyone to leave. The next morning, the residents in the neighborhood heard screams coming from the haunted house. But this time, when the police arrived, no one survived. All the recording equipment of the group of teenagers was still there, but there was no trace of Hung, Min, or Tao. People only saw the red roses in the garden blooming more vividly than ever, as if watered by fresh blood. Whispers still echoed in the wind, like an eternal curse for those who dared to step foot in that place. The curse of love, hatred, and death continued, passing down from generation to generation, with no escape. The house and the red roses still stood there, waiting for new victims, those who were sucked into the whirlpool of love and death. The dark zone of the curse. The house sank into darkness, but the haunting within never stopped. The spirits of Mai and Lan still lingered, restless. They dragged anyone entering the house into the abyss of hatred, trapping them in a chain of bizarre and horrifying events with no end. After the disappearance of the group of teenagers, curiosity of humans was not extinguished. Some amateur detectives, who did not believe in supernatural phenomena, decided to challenge fate. Among them was Tan, a spiritual investigator experienced in haunted houses, but this house was different. Tan did not know that she was stepping into a true nightmare. On the first night in the house, the atmosphere immediately became gloomy and suffocating. The night sky was obscured by thick dark clouds, and inside, the temperature was much colder than outside. Tan, with her camera and EMF meter, was confident that she could control everything. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, she felt like something was following her. When checking each room, the camera lights suddenly flickered oddly. Faint images appeared on the screen, resembling fleeting ghosts.